Know what to do that Russian forces on Ukrainian territory have begun to disintegrate. In a panic, the Kremlin accused the founder of the Wagner mercenary company, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, and the Russian Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov of treason. Russian soldiers and Wagner soldiers on Ukrainian territory clashed. Vladimir Putin, who began his invasion of Ukraine on February 24th last year, could not have imagined that the war would last so long. Although the Russian people criticized Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine, Putin does not seem to care about the opinions of his own people. With the war lasting so long, the Russian army in Ukrainian territory started to suffer a lot of casualties. Russian forces have also lost a lot of military equipment. Experts say that more than half of the Russian army inventory has been exhausted so far. Putin, who has also lost a lot of soldiers, is sending Wagner mercenaries to the places where Russian soldiers are insufficient in Ukrainian territory. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of the Wagner mercenary company, has sent all of the Wagner soldiers to Ukrainian territory due to their friendship with Vladimir Putin. However, due to the unfavorable conditions created by the war, Wagner soldiers and Russian soldiers started to disagree after a while. In recent months, the Ukrainian army was forced to retreat from this region due to the attacks of Wagner soldiers on the town of Soledar. When the Wagner soldiers captured the town of Soledar, Yevgeny Prigozhin puffed out his chest and was proud of the success of the Wagner soldiers. The same cannot be said for Vladimir Putin. After the capture of Soledar, the Russian leader addressed the Russian people. Putin said that Soledar was captured by the Russian army and Chechen soldiers, but he did not mention the Wagner soldiers in his speech. Putin's failure to mention the Wagner soldiers angered Yevgeny Prigozhin. Making a video statement from the Soledar front, Prigozhin stated that it was Wagner soldiers, not the Russian army, who captured the city of Soledar, and that most of the soldiers in Soledar belonged to the Wagner mercenary company. However, Prigozhin's statements infuriated Valery Gerasimov, the Russian Chief of Staff, and Sergei Shoigu, the Russian Defense Minister. This led to a major tension between Prigozhin and the Kremlin. Yevgeny Prigozhin accused Defense Minister Shoigu and Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov of vandalizing Wagner. In the city of Bakhmut, where the fighting is intense, the Russian army and the Wagner soldiers are still attacking the Ukrainian army. However, Yevgeny Prigozhin stated that the Wagner soldiers fighting for Russia in the city of Bakhmut were not provided with ammunition and military equipment, but all assistance was given to Russian and Chechen soldiers. Stating that Russian commanders betrayed them, Prigozhin said that, although there were many weapons and ammunition in the ammunition depots, Russian commanders did not share these ammunition with Wagner soldiers. After all these statements, Prigozhin, who wanted to teach Vladimir Putin a lesson, decided to stop the attacks of the Wagner soldiers on the Bakhmut front against the Ukrainian army. Prigozhin, who withdrew his troops on the Bakhmut front to the headquarters, wants to put the Russian army in a difficult situation. However, Prigozhin's decision caused a big fight between the Russian troop commanders and the Wagner soldiers. Forced to fight alone in Bakhmut, Russian soldiers were subjected to an offensive by the Ukrainian army late last night. When Ukrainian forces realized that the number of Russian soldiers on the Bakhmut front was decreasing, they wanted to turn this into an opportunity and launched a large-scale military operation against the Russian army. As a result of the Ukrainian army's offensive, the Russian troops were forced to leave their positions and retreat from the front line, retreating 7 kilometers further back from the Bakhmut border. The unit commander of the Russian army fighting against the Ukrainian army requested support from the Russian troops in Soledar. The Russian commander in Soledar asked the Wagner soldiers who had retreated from Bakhmut and returned to Soledar to go back to Bakhmut. However, the Wagner soldiers ignored these orders of the Russian commander and refused to go to Bakhmut. As the Wagner soldiers defied the Russian commander, a big argument broke out inside the headquarters. The Russian commander marched on Wagner soldiers and wanted to arrest Wagner soldiers for disobeying orders. A big fight started when Wagner soldiers marched on the Russian commander. Seeing that their commander was in a difficult situation, the Russian soldiers began to attack Wagner soldiers. A big fight broke out between Wagner and Russian soldiers inside the headquarters. The soldiers punched each other for minutes, almost killing each other. However, the fight was ended by the intervention of a different Russian commander in the headquarters. The prolongation of the war has badly affected the psychology of Russian soldiers serving in Ukraine. None of the Russian soldiers who went to Ukraine to fight did not expect the war to last so long. But it is not only Russian soldiers who have been affected by the war. The Russian people have also been badly affected. With the start of the war, the sanctions and embargoes imposed on Russia by the US and Western countries have been very troublesome for the Russian people. Russian citizens who did not feel the impact of sanctions and embargoes in the first months of the war started to feel the impact of these sanctions towards the middle of the war. Increasing inflation and deteriorating economy in Russia started to make Russian citizens uneasy. Price increases in food and technological products are bothering the Russian people. Russian citizens, whose social lives are badly affected, now want this war to end. People who want the Russian army to withdraw from Ukrainian territory often take to the streets and organize protests against Vladimir Putin and the war. Even wealthy people living in Russia have been badly affected by this war. Even Russian oligarchs close to Vladimir Putin are trying to get citizenship from different countries. Knowing that Putin and his supporters will be tried in international criminal courts after the end of the war, Russian oligarchs are leaving Russia by getting citizenship from different countries. They know that if they do not leave, Putin will demand their support. The vast majority of Russian oligarchs who do not want to support Vladimir Putin have fled the borders of Russia. Another reason for the flight of Russian oligarchs is the death of Russian oligarchs since the beginning of the war. The Russian oligarchs who started to die before the war started have also made other oligarchs living in Russia very uneasy. From a few months before the war until now, nearly 10 oligarchs have been found dead in Russia. All of these murdered oligarchs were anti-Vladimir Putin. In addition, the vast majority of these oligarchs were the owners of natural gas reserves in Russia. With the murder of these oligarchs, Vladimir Putin has now full control of natural gas in Russia. By controlling natural gas himself, Vladimir Putin can constantly threaten Western countries with natural gas. Putin, who often cuts off the flow of natural gas to Europe due to Western countries' support for Ukraine, uses his energy reserves as a weapon. For this reason, Russian oligarchs who want to survive are trying to get out of Russia. The majority of Russian oligarchs and Russian citizens go to Turkey. Because of the easy acquisition of citizenship in Turkey, they can easily buy citizenship in Turkey. Opposition officials in Turkey are very complaining about this situation. Turkish opposition officials are reacting to Russian oligarchs becoming Turkish citizens by buying a house worth $250,000–400,000 in Turkey. After the Russian army invaded Ukraine, the US and European countries started to seize Russian oligarchs' vehicles, such as airplanes and yachts. Knowing that their assets will be confiscated in European countries, Russian oligarchs prefer to settle in Turkey for this reason.